All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the November 14th Custodian Community Meeting. Dropping the agenda, the meeting notes in the meeting chat. Also going to look to share that. Okay, everybody seeing that okay? Is that coming through?
Yep.
Hopefully, yes. Good. All right. So, introductions. Got a pretty familiar crew here. If anyone wants to jump in and say hi, Tim, I know timing's a little awkward for you sometimes. If you can come say hey.
Hey, it's
Hey.
early-ish. How you doing?
Fair enough, thanks. All right. Before we get into the only, I called out one PR discussion just based on the on some of the bits that we talked about in the last meeting around this 9107 caching clients. Kapil, I saw you had added some, you'd done some testing with it, and we're still looking into it a bit. But before we get into specific PRs, does anyone have anything to raise? Any pressing topics?
Just wanted to give a call out from KubeCon CNCF last week. A couple updates in general on CNCF. Good attendance. There were two talks at KubeCon with regard to Custodian. One is sort of state of the mop maintainers talk, sort of highlighted through on some of the additions from last year. While I was calculating the stats, I noticed that we were extremely consistent at roughly like 70 contributors every 6 months, and about I forgot the exact number on the PRs. I think it was a total around 300. And we also just completed an external security audit with CNCF. I may follow up. I will follow up in the development Slack. Love to grab a group of maintainers to sort of group review on the findings, and before we go talk to the external audit team, AdaLogic. This is a process that CNCF contracts out to a third party, as this is also a graduation requirement, and definitely looking at targeting graduation from CNCF per their process next year. What does graduation mean in general? It just means like you're doing all the right things and you get some additional, marketing dollars. So nothing per se changes on the day-to-day, but for some organizations, it's just a market of assurance around the maturity of the project and its adoption. So it does help for some adopters. So that is all from KubeCon. Back to you, AJ.
Nice, thanks. That's cool to hear. The talks and audit be growing up. That's a good thing. Thanks for sharing that. Right before the meeting started, there was a little bit of a discussion about release planning. Kapil, you said release coming soon, possibly tomorrow. Anything to add on that or no?
Yeah, I mean, we're due for release. We had been aiming a little bit earlier in the month for the last few months, just because of KubeCon. I think this week is probably the right week to do it. US has Thanksgiving and holidays, and then everyone's got rain event for those that are coming. So now's the time, and I imagine we'll probably do a mid-December release as well, post KubeCon. Sorry, post re:Invent. So looking to try to get it cut out of release tomorrow. It will not include those client caching, that client caching PR, which I think it still needs some additional testing wet work. But we will have a bunch of new Azure resources that have been contributed. So as far as the main release highlights.
Okay, so new Azure resources is a good highlight. As far as general release planning, I know this has come up in previous calls that we aim to do once a month, looking earlier in the month. I don't know. I think there was I saw a question go by in Slack recently about if we have documented release plans somewhere. Is that worth? I mean, do we have, other than that coming up and we talk it through in community meetings like this? We don't have any published release schedule it's not clear to me that we need that, but do we have any? Does anyone have thoughts on that? Whether we should have something like that? Cool.
I mean,
All right,
nothing has a hard concrete. We generally aim for the first half of the month, but you know, there's enough variance. Our overall goal is we're 95% automated at this point is to get to 100% and then have it go out on a cadence with the ability to block the release based on flags on tickets and PRs.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, thanks. Yeah, when that comes up, I think we try to avoid the hard requirements just because it seems a little tricky to keep, and yeah, things come up. All right, so I think that's a bit it for the preamble, like the opening bit of the meeting. But then into specific PRs, this, you mentioned this won't be in the next release, but it is something we've talked a bit about, caching clients by region. Is there, between you or Pratyush, is there anything worth talking through on that one today?
I mean, in my opinion, the most important thing is just testing. I did some testing on C7 and org. I didn't see any cross account weirdness. I did see some cross region weirdness, and I wasn't entirely sure. And this was specific to S3. I wasn't entirely sure if that was just a separate existing issue. But always curious for additional feedback if anyone else has had a chance to kick the tires.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also did some testing with around 25 policies, 1,000 accounts. Didn't see any execution errors, but I didn't track the execution times with the client getting cash versus what is there right now. If that's of interest, I can run one more test with the execution times and memory used parameters.
Yeah, I'm not really worried about execution time overall. I mean, the original reason here, was to decrease execution time and memory usage. I'm mostly concerned here in the context of an org about correctness. The place we hook into to do resets on the cache doesn't appear to be executed fully, so executed outside of unit tests. So that's where it was mostly about running C7 and org and then looking at the report from out of C7 and org to look at are the resources the expected ones for each of the environments and for each of the regions.
Got it.
Okay.
Does this PR doesn't really apply to Lambda-based policies? Is that right?
It doesn't really apply to Lambda-based policies. Lambda-based policies that are in a centralized setup will still continue to work. They do use the reset functionality that this integrates into, but a typical Lambda policy and then we'll target leaf node account is mostly it's not germane, and with the exception of there's some minor memory improvements here. I think S3 is the place that you'll see the greatest policies against S3 resources and places that we've measured the best improvements as far as memory consumption peak.
Okay. Cool.
Okay, and as far as more testing required on that, that's just using more C79 org, more different combinations of assume roles and cross region, cross account, all kinds of stuff like that. Just working it out to see if there are any edge cases.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Cool. I have one other topic I'd like to talk through, but I want to make sure everyone else has has room first before I just take over. Does anybody else have issues, PRs, or general concerns to bring up? All right. Then the only other thing, I know this has come up a couple times, and Tim, you might have some input or interest in this one too, is this idea of being able to tag, being able to dynamically take a property of a resource and have that factor into an action. It's come up a lot with tags, but it has also come up with other in other requests lately, like resizing an auto-scaling group, changing the desired capacity or the max capacity based on metrics. Something where we're taking a resource-specific property and having it feed into an action. So initially, I was trying to do this just to try to talk through as a proposal with some weird syntax, interpolating a resource and having that be limited to the tag action. But I guess my bigger question is, should we allow resource level properties to affect potentially any actions, where we have kind of an interpolation path between when filters and actions run, and then potentially split the resources set into chunks if we need to have more finer grained actions, rather than multiplying rather than using multiple policies to accomplish the same thing. This may be a bit weird to talk through, or folks may not have opinions
Yeah,
on
I
it, but
mean,
it would be.
I worry about handling it generically in a fast case, because detecting the resource itself in it requires rendering it, and then you have to render it per resource to be able to group it. Like you'd have to be able to extract the expression itself from the format. Like it's a little bit weird, and I think we have a clear understanding that there's a tag use case. I don't know that we have a clear understanding that there's a lot of use cases beyond that.
Okay, so we would still want to handle that in the specific action. So if somebody wanted to have kind of a dynamic auto-scaling adjustment based on metrics, then the way forward would be have some kind of enhancement to that action, to the action specifically as they need it, with tags being the first case, the most common.
I mean, let's talk through the other one, like where in the ASG you talk about ASG step up, step down based on metrics, but the step up, step down, like you still need the map, let's say, on the resource. And that's still fairly easily or more easily handled in line to that particular action implementation, as far as I can see.
Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to kind of talk through here, is if we have that same sort of concern come up for multiple actions, does it make sense to do that splitting out or that individual handling per action, or bring it sooner? And it sounds like keeping it in the action is going to keep things.
I think we get to some, like there's a question, like the balance is what is the cost to implement versus how used do we expect it to be across multiple use cases that are independent. And we've clearly heard one. We might have a second, but that's still not clear. Like, do we have a third and a fourth type of thing is really where we get into how do we optimize the implementation on generic.
Yeah, that's fair. And Tim, you had a hand up. You got something on this?
Yeah, I have opinions. I would strongly suggest not trying to do it generic first. But if we know we have a tagging use case, and I'm pretty sure we do, it would make sense to work through that first. I think it's worthwhile trying to work out before we start, is to work out what are the key issues and problems we see with it, and try and design it up front, as Kapil was saying, working out analyzing and grouping appropriately, trying to make sure that when we're doing the original design that it's not tied too specifically. But then we get to the stage where we say, oh, if there is a second and third case, so my opinions generally are make it generic when you hit the third time. 1 time's fine, 2 times you can copy it across. The third time, then you think, okay, maybe we should make something more generic and refactor. But until we hit that, I don't think there's much point trying to be generic before we need to be generic. So I think I'm just in agreement with what Kapil says.
Cool.
But I do
Yeah.
think we should start with tagging. We know we've got a use case there with like tag normalization. So maybe we take that as a key focus to start with.
Yeah, that sounds perfectly fine to me. That was my initial thought too, was just to focus on tag, and then when we got the other questions, I thought, "Ooh, am I just being too tunnel vision on tags?" But no, it sounds like that's still a good way to go. Cool.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I
to you
think
both.
that sounds like all valid agreement, but I'd also add in that once you have something generic, it's really hard to yank back. So,
Yeah, that's a fair point too. And I also, so one thing on the specific to the action deal, one thing that I was trying to avoid with this, it still may be the best way, is adding more, making the schema of a tag action more complex to handle the resource specific bits or any kind of dynamic lookups. I mean, it's still something that we can do, and it's always a bit of a trade-off of, do we make the syntax we have more flexible and potentially more confusing, or do we expand the schema and make the schema itself more confusing, which is also hard to unwind.
I don't think we need to expand the schema. I mean, like we
Cool.
have variables. Like I think we want to just have it as a resource format string and try to have some notion of being able to detect the existence of that string, and then go into like the grouping classification on what the value potential is on it. I mean, we may end up having to do the rendering per resource and then group by value on that. But in this case, it's fairly bounded on a single key. On the generic side, we don't necessarily know where it's going to be. Yeah, I think
Cool.
we've got a path here.
Nice. All right. Thanks again to you both. And I think that's all I've got from here. Kapil, I saw your recent change go through for the AWS CC. That was just an API change upstream where they added a property, and we just needed to add that. That's how we're
Oddly,
breaking, right?
Amazon broke the OpenStack PR, but yeah, that's how I noticed that.
All right. Well, I think that's about it then for now, unless any of this discussion triggered any questions or any follow-ups for anyone else on the call.
Yeah, I just kind of had a general question. I'm not sure if you guys can point us in the right direction, but is there a case where like we're handling things like I know we do retries for some of the like resource querying. Is there any case where we do stuff like exponential backoff or like rate basically like API like throttling type stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a layered approach right now, and that makes it all. And there's a lot of options. It's a layered approach, and there's a lot of options per se. Effectively, retry in Custodian is whatever the SDK does. Okay, let me. This is provider specific as far as behavior and implementation. In AWS, which I assume is your context. If it's not, then okay. Effectively, the SDK itself has a built-in retry mechanism that is tunable by environment variables, and then Custodian adds a layer on top. So Custodian does a geometric backoff, let's say, versus a full like a pure exponential. The SDK also has tunables around it that you can set via environment variables. If you like look for like photo SDK retry, like those, they default to like a classic mode, which isn't great, but it, is viable. But you can also switch it to like adaptive, and you can set the max retries at that level. But just be aware that Custodian is doing a level of retries on top of that. Like there's a notion that if you're in an environment that's needing lots of retries, you're at a tipping over point for for API availability for application usage as well, just to be aware. And,
Okay.
and at that point, that is also one of the reasons that Custodian has additional sources for querying the data. In terms of, I mean, AWS, we have config, Azure, we have resource graph, at GCP, we have Cloud Asset Inventory as additional places when you have an account that has an API under load due to other consumption by applications. You can switch out your source from the service to the cloud's native inventory capability service to be able to lighten that load. But that in this context specifically to AWS, that those SDK tunables are there and are worth experimenting with because they can make a significant difference.
Okay. So things like, the retry method, like, can we tune that from that method itself?
It's literally just setting an environment variable. There's two there's two environment variables. One's the strategy, and one is the number of retries for the SDK level. And this, like the classic strategy is not that great, so it's worth switching out. Like I said, if you Google Photo SDK retry strategy environment variables, that's a mouthful. If you actually want to raise this in general, Custodian Slack, I'm happy to drop an answer in there with some additional details.
Cool.
Oh, and Produce dropped a direct link. Thank you.
So that's through the SDK itself, but we can, with an environment variable, I mean, basically, can we, how does, so like for say like Lambda based implementations, like how do we, is that something that we can plug into like the policy itself, or is that like more, we'd have to?
Yes, you can set environment variables for the SDK and the Lambda policy by.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay. Do we have any examples of that in the docs or anything? That's super helpful, by the way. We might try to do that for some of our throttling issues.
If we don't, then I think that's a good bug to say that we should have it in the docs.
Okay.
But yeah, like I said, if you want to drop a message in general, we can try to provide it in different contexts, both on a Lambda policy as well as just the generic environment variable. And if you don't see it in the docs, then we should have a GitHub ticket to update the docs. And that'd be great.
Cool.
Yeah, that looks like, I know that this has come up in issues or discussions before, and it seems like some of the more edge case type stuff might be a good fit for a discussion if it's a little bit gnarly for the docs. But I think we have had folks doing the overrides, adding additional stuff in, like through AWS profiles, environment variables, things like that. Yeah, Slack's a good start. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Any other ideas? That was a good question, by the way. Thanks. All right. If we've got nothing else, we'll let you all enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.